Welcome back to a further edition of Men's Inner Health with Mark Randall. In this conversation, I'm going to take a risk and delve into men's vulnerability. Ooh, that spot. Let's not go there, shall we? Vulnerability, an interesting place for men. No, it's not. I wonder, have we men placed our vulnerability or disowned our vulnerability and shifted it into the shadow side of ourselves? Yeah, the good old shadow. You know, vulnerability, it's not an easy place to be. Vulnerability is that area of ourselves that we men don't like, and we've really suppressed it with our stoicism, our machoism. We deem vulnerability as a weakness, but it's not. It's definitely not a weakness. It's a strength. Dr. Brené Brown, another social worker in the United States, has done a lot of work on vulnerability, and she describes vulnerability as an uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And to be human is to be vulnerable. How do we men learn to come into an acceptance of our vulnerability? How do we learn to explore it? How do we learn to be with it? How do we learn to communicate it? Rather than shut it down, push it into our shadow side, disown it. You know, perhaps it comes out in not so great ways. Maybe it's our vulnerability that we're resisting. We get angry, frustrated. Can we convert that anxiety into anger, frustration, disappointment, shutdown? You know, when we're emotionally exposed, can we men feel a sense of shame? Yep, we can. Sigmund Freud once said that, you know, unexpressed emotions will never die. They'll just come forward in uglier ways. Now, perhaps that uglier ways over the years has now been defined as that toxic masculinity. Not a nice definition of men's masculinity. The more we men develop, self-develop in personal growth, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, maybe we'll come into a better place to bring forth our experiences of vulnerability in much more healthier ways. Yeah, vulnerability isn't easy. We're all vulnerable. Yeah, deep down inside ourselves, yeah, we do have a vulnerable part. We're all vulnerable as human beings. And rather than discard it, throw it away, push it down the rabbit holes, how do we let it start to surface instead of arguing, defending it, trying to protect it? How do we learn to just be in touch with it? It is going to surface. And when it surfaces, another way of describing our vulnerability, it's sort of like an inner child. Yes, when we're young, we're vulnerable, and our parents did the best they could. But sometimes, you know, they're human. Maybe they didn't love us enough. Maybe they didn't care about us enough. Maybe they criticised us too much. Or maybe they're just not available. And our vulnerability gets hurt. None of us like to be exposed. But in healthy ways, and particularly in our relationships, our vulnerabilities are going to surface. And when our vulnerabilities are surfacing, we can feel really overwhelmed. How do we communicate this to our partners? How do we communicate this to our friends? But as men, we collectively say, oh, we're not vulnerable, we're macho, we can't do that. Seriously? Well, guess what? We can. The more we get in touch and start to own our vulnerability, bring our vulnerability forward into our consciousness. And it was Carl Jung said that all the material that we bury in our subconscious is always trying to become conscious. And the times when they're becoming conscious, 9 times out of 10, are in our relationships to our partners, to family, friends. How do we open up and begin to learn how to care? Yes, when we're vulnerable and overwhelmed, sometimes that will come out as tears. How do we then begin to soften and learn to appropriately express our vulnerability? You know, whenever we're getting angry, if we stop, breathe, can we start to look a bit deeper and see what is the trigger in our vulnerability, in that vulnerable self of ours? You know, when that vulnerable self is lovingly held in a beautiful relationship with our partners, her vulnerability is there, and it's a shared vulnerability. It's a beautiful vulnerability. Our vulnerability is going to be triggered, you know, when we're overstressing with work or whatever the case may be. And we can feel vulnerable. We can feel like we're not coping. And when we're not coping, are we being exposed? Instead of being ashamed about it, how do we just accept it? How do we break it down into smaller bite-sized steps that can make it more manageable? How often do you talk about your vulnerability? Yeah, there are times, if we can create safe spaces in our relationship, we can start owning our vulnerability. We can start bringing our vulnerability out of our shadow side into our consciousness. Our vulnerability, yeah, it's fragile, it's delicate. It is like an inner child, perhaps. You know, how do we care for that inner child within ourselves, that vulnerable side of ourselves? Perhaps start small. You know, start taking the risks. Talk to your partner about it. Talk to a close friend. Communicate it. If you're getting emotional, don't stop. Take some time to breathe into that space. Really begin to become aware of it. Begin to notice it. Don't judge it. Stop judging yourself. Stop being critical of it. Care for it. What's it needing? You may need to ask an intuitive question. Listen to that intuitive voice. What would your intuitive voice, what would that deeper unconditional love that's deep down in your heart, what would it do for your vulnerability? Yeah, sometimes when we get too vulnerable and we're too emotional or too down, yeah, we don't have the energy. But rather than say there's nothing wrong, why not put our hands up and just say, hey darling, can I talk to you, or contact someone like myself or other therapists? I think the more we men start looking into our vulnerabilities, caring for our vulnerabilities, stop converting these vulnerabilities in ugly ways, maybe there would be perhaps less toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is well documented. And yeah, perhaps we are guilty of that. Isn't it time to change? Be gentle and enjoy.